Okay, so tonight I'll be presenting an analysis of the statements of reason submitted by applicants to the Victorian Central and Voluntary Donor Registers. And to the best of our knowledge, no other study we know has looked at donor linking via state-funded statutory supported means. And I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues on this project, Fiona Kelly, Bryony Horsfall, Jennifer Power from Victorian University, and also Kate Byrne, Karen Hammerberg, and Louise Johnston from VARTA. Okay, so a bit about the statement of reason. So since June 2015, applicants for donor linking through Victoria's donor registers have been required to complete a statement of reason where consent is required for information exchange. And the statement of reason contains 3 sections. The reasons for applying, a short-term goal, and also a long-term goal. So applicants can write their statements either independently of the VARTA counsellors or with the assistance of a VARTA counsellor, and the information that they provide is passed on to the party that they're inquiring about. Since March 2017, consent is only required when it is someone other than the donor-conceived person making the application, so the requirement to complete an SOR has become more limited. But we chose to analyse the statements of reason because they're a very rich source of information about the meaning of genetic connections to those who make applications. So our research questions for the study: what kind of information are people seeking when they apply to the central and voluntary donor registers? And also, what are their expectations of the outcome? So this just gives you a bit of a sense of how we conducted the study. We sought permission from people who'd agreed to be recontacted for research purposes and who had completed a statement of reason between June 2015 and March 2017 for their statement, which was anonymised to be used in the research. And we recruited via email. So this just gives you a sense of how our sample that we recruited for our study compares with the VARTA database population. So through checking the VARTA database and manual files, we identified 91 eligible participants, of whom 42 consented to take part. So that gives us a response rate of about 46%. And as you'll see from the slide, the proportions of applicant type are similar in the population and also the sample. So recipient parents were the largest group of applicants in the sample and database, closely followed by donor-conceived people. So there were a relatively small number of donors who were applicants compared to the other 2 groups. So this slide's quite busy, so I just want to draw your attention to the fact that most donor-conceived people were aged between 30 and 39, most recipient parents in their 40s, and most of the donors were in their 60s. Keeping in mind that there's rather a small number and they're all sperm donors compared to the other applicant groups. And when we looked at VARTA records in further depth, we realised that most of the applicants were single parents and they were making applications to the donor registers when their children were aged 6 years or under. So parents of young children making applications. Okay, so this just gives you a bit of a sense of the kind of information that applicants were seeking. So, by far the most popular type of information that people were seeking in all categories was that kind of holistic personal information about the person that they were applying about. So a sense of their interests, their likes, their dislikes, what kind of person they were. The donor-conceived group were also very interested in medical and genetic history, more so than the recipient parent group. And the donor-conceived group and the recipient parent group were both very interested in the family history and experiences and family background of the donor. So ancestry, ethnicity, whether they had other children, whether they were married, these kinds of facts. Physical characteristics and traits, also very popular, but less so than seeking that more holistic information about likes and dislikes. And photos, also very popular, particularly for the recipient parent group and the donor conceived group, but less so for donors making applications. So I want to spend the rest of the time just giving you more of a qualitative sense of the kinds of information the kinds of statements that people are making.
Could I ask a question?
So, sorry?
Could you just quickly explain what the difference is between the central register and the voluntary register?
I might leave that question to Louise at the end. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, in regards to requests for personal information, this sense of curiosity was very prominent in the statements. I do wonder about you, and particularly wonder if you like to travel, as I've travelled overseas extensively. I enjoy playing tennis, cycling, skiing. I hope that by sharing a little bit about me, it will help you feel comfortable to share a little bit about yourself. So that was a quote from a donor. And similarly from a donor-conceived person, I guess if there's any common personality similarities. I'm sociable, successful in my profession at a young age, independent, fit, and a keen sports person. So this is who I am, sharing a bit of information about myself and hoping perhaps that you'll share that information too. These are two quotes from recipient parents. And for recipient parents, sometimes the desire for information seemed to have been generated by direct questioning from their children, whereas at other times it was because of their beliefs that this information would be of benefit to children in the future. So, although I've read the donor profile, my child asked me questions. What is your name? Where do you live? But there are interests that my child has that don't appear to come from myself. So a very common theme was looking to the donor to explain characteristics or traits that couldn't be detected in the family of origin. These are a few quotes that give you a sense of the issues that were coming up with regard to medical and genetic history. So particularly common in the statements that were written by donor-conceived people. Sometimes they'd experienced illness and wanted more information to be able to be further prepared about illnesses in the family. And sometimes they had fears about illnesses that may manifest in the future, and were particularly thinking about their own children that they might have in the future and their well-being. And when donors were making contact, in their statements, it appeared that they were often motivated by a sense of responsibility to impart medical information that had come to life to children that were born of their donation. Here are a few quotes about physical characteristics, and again that sense of curiosity or wonder about where my physical traits have come from was quite common. So people sought information about the physical appearance of their donor to explain physical attributes that were not apparent in the family of the known biological parent. And recipient parents were also seeking information about donors that could explain their children's physical traits, particularly if those traits differed from their own. So this gives you a sense of some of the expressed wishes for photographs. And recipient parents expressed the most interest in receiving photos and providing photos of children in exchange. And common reasons for wanting photos were to provide their child with a visual record of the donor over time, to enable their child to see that the donor was a real person. So they said things like, so far it's just the man, it would be great to tell them the name of the man and perhaps a photo to put in their baby books. And also, again, to find the source of their child's unexplained physical characteristics. And sorry, the quote down the bottom's cut off a little bit, but donor-conceived people were often very curious to see if their physical appearance was similar to that of the donor. These quotes just give you a bit of a sense of the interest in family history and family experiences. we became very curious about our maternal ancestry, our donor. For instance, are you married or in a long-term relationship? Do you have children of your own? Did you grow up in a big family? And it was also very common, as in the second quote, for both donor-conceived people and recipient parents to share information about their family structure and relationship quality, often as if to reassure the donor that they were not wanting a new family or to make too many demands. So this just gives you a sense of contact expectations. So what we found was that all of the statements that we analysed indicated an interest in some form of contact with the subject of their application, whether that was in the long term or in the short term. And typically there was an emphasis on beginning slowly, say via email, building up to the possibility of face-to-face contact if that was mutually agreeable. And as you can see from the quote that's shown at the top, donors tended to be a bit more circumspect about this than other applicants, and they tended to emphasise that the contact should be driven by the other party, not them, so respecting the wishes of the donor-conceived person. Recipient parents who were most likely to be single mothers seemed to have the strongest views about the benefits of face-to-face contact, and sometimes this was because their children had expressed a desire to meet the donor, but also because of strong beliefs that this was in their children's best interests. Okay, so how am I over time? You doing well? All right, so just to bring some of this together. So of the 91 applicants who completed statements of reasons in the time frame, we analysed 42 of those statements with their agreement. And we found that recipient parents were the largest category of applicant, followed closely by donor-conceived people. Of the recipient parent participants, most were single mothers, and most had applied to the registers when their children were aged 6 years or under. Reasons for applying included a desire for knowledge about medical history, a desire for knowledge of the donor's physical traits, family history and personality, but wanting to get a sense of who the subject of the application was as a person, or a more holistic sense of who they are, was really much more predominant for all parties. Okay, now our findings indicate that where donor linking is professionally supported and normalised through law, expectations, particularly of ongoing contact, may increase. And this could signal a potentially greater need for expectation management in the wake of statutory donor linking. So for instance, in Australia, Victoria is the only state that has on-site counsellors, although counsellors in private practice are in all states and territories. Okay, so there was similar and different information sought by donor-conceived people, sperm donors and recipient parents. A keener interest among donor-conceived people about medical and genetic history, and the recipient parent statements that we analysed, a slightly stronger interest in the benefits of contact. And I think we found very much that the statements demonstrate. What have I done? Sorry. The statements demonstrate the extent to which resemblance talk or resemblance spotting can be very much taken for granted family practice. Similarly, a very popular assumption is that children's looks are a perfect blend of their biological parents. If the key to how a person looks can't be found on one side of the family, it must be found in the other. And this may or may not be the case, but and the principles of genetic inheritance are more complex than this. But the statements reveal how emotionally powerful and how commonplace this belief is in our cultural setting. I think we still have more to learn why single mothers with children under 6 are our biggest group of applicants. And there's only so much that we can know from reading the statements. And I know from reading other research such as Joanna's overseas, suggests that the predominance of single mothers in our sample could be due to stigma, the idea that it's not responsible to have a child as a lone parent without being able to identify the biological father, or also hoping that future contact with the donor could result in a larger support network for the mother or children. For instance, access to more brothers and sisters, and a father figure with whom to develop relationships and expanded family networks. We should also make the point that it's also likely to be easier for single parents to make contact because there is no second parent who could feel threatened or undermined by this course of action, as there is for a lesbian or a heterosexual couple. So, where donor linking is normalised by law and professionally supported, parties may have greater expectations of ongoing contact and relationship building. And this may contribute to a new era of openness, but will also require increased focus on expectation management and attention to the impact of donor linking on family members beyond the applicant and recipient. And in light of this, we've embarked on a couple of other research studies which we're continuing to explore. So what happens after links are made through the registers? And we're starting a small interview-based study in conjunction with VARTA. And Fiona Kelly and I also have a larger national project on how linking is occurring through and beyond use of the formal registers, which will look at the impact of linking on a range of family relationships, and also the views of clinicians and how people are linking, say through methods such as DNA testing, online detective work, those sorts of means. Okay, so I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues again and thank the applicants who gave access to their data for this project, VARTA staff, and